Hey, Shalom, Akim, Shalom, Shalom, giving all praises, glory and honor to Yahweh, Ba'ashim Yahushai, Ba'ashim Rakakwadash, double honors to the apostles and the elders, great millstone, for teaching us his truth and citations to the sincere Akim and Akwath, and listen. May the blessing of election be upon your house. My name is Raquai, and back in here with another quick and Lord's will, as always, an edifying lesson. And for today's lesson, I kind of just wanted to read through Tobit in the first chapter, kind of go through some things and some of the things that he did during his captivity, and then understanding, even though, and even just seeing really mostly the conduct of one of our forefathers during that time, because the scriptures talk about how the things are written aforetime or written for our learning. Although the difference is that he was in he went into captivity, under the Assyrians. It shows that it shows a parallel between his conduct even in the midst of captivity, as well as our conduct, because when you look at the mass majority of our people, they behave like, as the scriptures talk about, degenerates of a strange vine, right? When we're created really to be nobles, right? So, I wanted to read through this particular chapter, and I sincerely hope that and pray that this lesson, is edifying. As a matter of fact, let me start off. Let me start off here. Just bear with me 1 second. This is Job chapter 8, verse 8. And it says here, "For I inquire, I pray thee of the former age, and prepare thyself to the search of their fathers." Right? So, in this time, we're basically, searching the ways of our forefathers, right? And understanding, looking at their behaviors, the way they behaved, some of the things that they did was pleasing unto the Lord, right? And then hopefully, Yahweh Ratazah, that the Lord, covers us, has mercy upon us, just basically remembering our sacrifice, like kind of like how the Lord had respect unto Abel's sacrifice, right? When you look at the people, our people, especially the mass majority of our people, like I said before, they're basically offering up a sacrifice that's likened unto, Cain. They have a very, especially, Cain, when you go into his story, he had a very strong distaste, towards his own brother, right? He had his mindset was like, am I my brother's keeper, right? So he didn't, regard the welfare of his brother, right? And that is a spirit, that same Cain-like spirit has trickled down onto, our people, the way they care about each other. They don't, as a matter of fact, I should say, the way they don't show that they care for each other, right? The further and the more we dwell within this system, you see the more the degeneracy, the level of degeneracy, and it increases. You know what I'm saying? So let me go to the chapter, and Lord's will, this lesson be edifying, right? I just thought I would sit outside today. It's kind of like it's a little cool outside, it's kind of nice to be around nature, right? This is Tobit chapter 1, verse 1, and it says this, this is the words of Tobit, the book of the words of Tobit, the son of Tobiel, the son of Ananiel, the son of Aduel, the son of Gabiel, of the seed of Asael, of the tribe of Naphtali, whom in the time of Emanessar, which is Shalmaneser, the king of the Assyrians, was led captive out of Thisbe, which I believe that is northern Galilee, the upper portion of Galilee, if I'm not mistaken. And it says here, which is at the right hand of that city, which is called properly Naphtali in Galilee, above Asser, right? So I believe that's Asher, if I'm not mistaken, right? So you had the northern tribes, ultimately during the time of King David, and partially under King Solomon, we had a specific time of peace, right? The tribes were united together, but after, when you go through King Solomon's story, there was a split, there was a division. When you see he began to pay homage to the gods of the different concubines that he had, right? And ultimately, the Lord was very displeased with that. And it's the same thing, today. When you look at the mass majority of our people today, the Lord is very displeased, with our people's behavior, right? This is why they get, jacked up. It's the same idea. Like, as a matter of fact, it's the same concept, right? The only difference really that's changing is the captivity and the person that's ruling, right? Let's see here. This is Ecclesiastes chapter 1, verse 9, and it says, "The thing that hath been, it is that which shall be, and the thing and that which is done, is that which shall be done, and there is no new thing under the sun." Verse 10, it says, "Is there anything whereof it may be said, See, this is new? It hath already been of old time, which was before us," right? So, the only thing that's really different, between, the time of Tobit and then our time, is that the captivity has differed. But the Lord punished us because of those wicked behaviors, right? I'm going to get that later on as well. So this is verse 3, Tobit chapter 1. And it says this, and it says, "I, Tobit, walked in all the days of my life." Where was I? "In the ways of truth and justice, and did many alms deeds to my brethren and to my nation, and who came with me to Nineveh in the land of the Assyrians." So basically, Nineveh was the capital of Assyria, right? So this is verse 4, and it says, "And when I was in mine own country, in the land of Israel, being but young, all the tribe of Naphtali, my father fell from the house of Jerusalem, which was chosen out of all the tribes of Jerusalem, and all the tribes should sacrifice there, where the temple of the habitation of the Most High was consecrated and built for all ages." It says, "Now all the tribes which together revolted and the house of my father Naphtali sacrificed unto the heifer Baal. But I alone went often to Jerusalem at the feast, as it was ordained unto all the people by an everlasting decree, having first fruits, the 10th of the increase, which with that which was first shorn. And them I gave at the altar to the priests, to the children of Aaron," right? So they were basically, in the ancient times, the children of Israel, they would give their first fruits, to the priests at Jerusalem. So they had the best, wine, and they give they give the best of their best, right? The first of their increase, because in the ancient times we lived more of an agricultural lifestyle. We lived a lot closer to the land. It's not like we didn't have fridges and grocery stores and all this kind of stuff, right? When you needed something, you had it within, like, maybe for some people, they might have had a vineyard, right? Because those things were an example of resources. I want to show you that, actually. Hold on, let me get something here. Showing you this decree, this custom. This is all part of our culture. This is Deuteronomy 26, verse 1 here. And it says, and when it shall be when thou art come into the land, which the Lord thy power giveth thee for an inheritance, and possess it, and dwellest therein, that thou shalt take the first of all the fruit of all the earth, which thou shalt bring into the land, bring of thy land, that the Lord Yahweh thy power giveth thee, and put it in a basket, and shall go unto the place which the Lord Yahweh thy power shall choose to put his name there. This is verse 3. And it says, and thou shalt go unto the priest that shall be in all those days, and say unto him, I profess this day unto the Lord thy power, that I am come unto the country which the Lord Yahweh sware unto us, unto our fathers, for to give us. Here's really the point. And it says, verse 4, and the priest shall take the basket out of thine hand, and set it down before the altar of the Lord thy power. Right? So this was, a custom and a culture, because remember, the priests were basically taken care of, because their duty was basically to administer the priestly duties, perform sacrifices, diagnosing, what's it called? Goodness, how you call that stuff? Like you had lepers, you had people that had like a skin disease, you know what I'm saying? The teaching of the law, you know what I'm saying? Like the priests had a heavy responsibility, maintaining, the lampstand, and, all these priestly duties that, that they did back then, right? The burning of incense, all that. It was a very tedious and a very laborious job, right? So to take that responsibility, so they wouldn't have to basically go and farm and perform the priestly duties, the Lord designed it in a way where the children of Israel would give their basically their first fruits to be able to take care of the priests, so they'd be able to actually administer their priestly duties and execute the priest office, right? So this is what's just as an edification here. And this is verse 7 in Tobit chapter 1. And it says, the first tenth of all increase I gave to the sons of Aaron who ministered at Jerusalem. Another 10th part I sold away and went and spent it every year at Jerusalem. Right? And it says, and the third I gave unto them to whom it was meet, as Deborah my father's mother had commanded me, because I was left an orphan by my father. Verse 9. Furthermore, when I was come to the age of a man, I married Anna of my own kindred, and of her I begat Tobias. Right? Also showing that, men, are the ones that carry the seed, right? And, you really see that in Matthew, the first chapter, with the genealogy of Yahushua. They are the ones that carry both the X and the Y chromosome, right? So it says here, verse 10, and when we were carried away captives to Nineveh, of all my brethren, those that were of my kindred did eat of the bread of the Gentiles. But I kept myself from eating, because I remembered the Most High, Yahweh Bashim Yahushua, with all my heart, right? It's the same principle. It's only a very, very small remnant that's actually going to remember basically Yahweh Bashim Yahushua in their captivity, and actually, show appreciation for that mercy, right? And actually going to actually receive that mercy. You know what I'm saying? But, in this time, because we discontinued from our heritage, we basically kind of like, we completely forgot who we were. But in this time, we're basically remembering ourselves and seeking the Lord 10 times more. This is, where is that? This is Baruch 2:30, and it says, For I knew they would not hear me, because it is a stiff-necked people, but in the land of their captivity they shall remember themselves, and shall know that I am the Lord their power, and I will give them an heart and ears to hear, and they shall praise me in the land of their captivity, and think upon my name, right? So, just to show you the importance of thinking upon the Lord's name, the understanding who the Lord is, and understanding that, in this captivity, we're actually remembering, ourselves. We're disregarding those different bywords, and this time how we were called by our enemies, black and Mexican, Cuban, and all this kind of stuff, right? Putting off those ways and coming under a righteous, vibration, right? And Yahushua is the one that's helping to breach up the close up that breach, that vexation that has existed for so long between the northern and the southern tribe. Because when you go into Tobit's time, or shortly before Tobit's time, there was a splitting up of the northern and the southern kingdom, which Tobit belongs to that northern kingdom tribes of Naphtali, right? But now under Yahushua, there's a coming together of those two sticks, as it describes in Ezekiel, this 37th chapter, right? So, I just wanted to, touch on that. This is going back to the story. And that's one of the things, if I may add real quick, that's one of the things that, our people, the enemies are afraid of, because, they don't like, they one of the things that Esau has been very good at doing is causing, discord between, our brethren, right? Between the northern and southern kingdom, causing all this friction, with this whole light skin, dark skin, false doctrine and all this kind of stuff. Like, Ephraim is a cake unturned, but we've been together, we've been separated for so long that we don't look at each other as brethren, right? And a lot of our people still carry that vibration today, because they don't consider themselves, as it says in Isaiah, the first chapter, they don't consider that they are the same people, right? And really, Esau is the one that has sown discord, among you, right? So let me go back here. This is Tobit chapter 1, verse 13. And it says, and the Most High, Yahweh Bashem gave me grace and favor before Shalmaneser. It says Manasseh here. And so that I was his purveyor. And I went to Media and left in trust with Gabiel, the brother of Gabrias, at Rages, a city of Media, 10 talents of silver. Now when Shalmaneser was dead, Sennacherib his son reigned in his stead, and whose estate was troubled, that I could not go to Media. And at that time, of Shalmaneser, I gave many alms to my brethren, and gave my bread to the hungry, right? And it says, my clothes to the naked. And if I saw any of my nation dead, or cast about to the walls of Nineveh, I buried them. And if Sennacherib had slain any, when he was come and fled from Judea, I buried them privately. For in his wrath he killed many, but the bodies were not found when they were sought for of the king, right? So there's a lot going on here. So let's unpack this, right? So here it is. Tobit is, he's describing alms, right? So we know that, alms is also very important as well. You know what I'm saying? Like, when you think about, let me get it actually. I think in Peter's, it describes it perfectly. Give me 1 second. It's kind of windy out. he's offering up that a righteous, pleasing sacrifice, even in the midst of captivity, right? So, you know, this is one of the things that is pleasing unto the Lord. Let's see, where is it? One second. This is First Peter chapter 4, verse 7, and it says, "But the end of all things is at hand." And it says, "Be therefore and watch unto prayer, and above all things have fervent charity amongst yourselves, for charity shall cover a multitude of sins," right? So, and charity is not limited to just money. You understand? Like, it's not as the Catholic Church, likes to display it. And one of the things, and that's another thing too, what they like to do is they like to display their alms in front of men, right? So they can get the praise of men, right? If you have the ability to do alms, do it, right? It doesn't, you never know, man. The Lord could easily remember those things, in times of Jacob's trouble, right? You know what I'm saying? And sometimes too, like, you may not even feel like it. You might see somebody on the side of the road, because I've caught myself in the middle of doing these things too. Like, you might have somebody might look to be homeless, you're not too sure, right? But they might ask you for money. Sometimes you might be entertaining angels unawares as well, right? So, sometimes, and even, as a matter of fact, James describes this. Let me get that. One second. This is James chapter 2, verse 14. And it says, "What doth it profit, my brethren, though if a man say he hath faith and not works, can faith save him? If a brother or a sister be naked and destitute of daily food, and one of you say unto them, Depart in peace, but ye are warmed and filled, notwithstanding, ye give them not those things which are needful for the body, what doth it profit?" This is verse 17. "Even so faith, hath not works, is dead being alone," right? So, sometimes the Lord will put us in situations where, like, to exemplify those different fruits of the Spirit, right? And, charity, like, we have a lot of sins to pay for, right? So, sometimes it's a good habit to actually, be cognizant of, like, you don't want to be like when you go into David's story, like Nabal. He didn't help out David and his men when he was in a time of trouble, but you see the behavior of how Abigail, handled the situation, and actually she basically made haste to basically look out for David and his men at the time, right? Because David wanted to, like, he wanted to F him up. You know what I mean? So, like, it's just something to, keep in mind too, right? The Lord puts us in these different situations to exemplify these different these different fruits of the Spirit, right? Offering up, and that's really the objective, is to offer up more sweet smelling, sacrifice, not really like a sacrifice that's like a smoke in the Heavenly Father's nose, right? Like, oh no, another good example of this, not to go too off topic, was when you read about in Philippians, I believe it's the last chapter, how you saw how the Israelites in Philippi, they looked out for the Apostle Paul, right? And looked out for his basically his well-being, right? So how much more, us in this time, right? So let me go back to the story. This is Tobit chapter 1, verse let's see here. I'll start at verse 19 again, and it says, and when one of the Ninevites went and complained of me to the king that I buried them, I hid myself, understanding that I was sought for to be put to death. I withdrew myself for fear. Then all my goods were forcibly taken away. Neither was there anything left to me. Neither was there anything left to me beside my wife Anna and my son Tobias, right? And you know what's cool? You know what's interesting as well. I will say it like this. When you deal in the ancient times, bodies are really, to an honorable burial is like when you're properly covered. Like a good example of that was the when the prophet Samuel, when he passed, the Israelites, they gathered and they mourned for him. But you see here during his time, he took the time to actually bury the bodies, right? Because burying a body represents it brings basically a remembrance to who that person was. It brings understanding to, okay, who this person was, their identity, they came from this so and so family, you know what I'm saying? But there were so many bodies that were slain during this time, they were not even found, right? So you see all these different examples of righteousness that he performed during his captivity. So how much more, not to say we have to bury bodies, but this is just as an example of righteous deeds, right, that Tobit performed during his time of captivity, right? So it says here, verse 20, then all my goods were forcibly taken away. Neither was there anything left to me beside my wife and my son Tobias. And there passed not 55 days before two of his sons killed him and fled into the mountains of Ararat. And Sarchedonus, his son, reigned in his stead, who appointed over his father's accounts and over all his affairs. Achacharis, my brother Ananiel's son, and Achacharis entreated for me, I returned to Nineveh. Now Achacharis was cupbearer, keeping of the signet, and the steward and overseer of the accounts. And Sarchedonus appointed him next to him, and he was my brother's son, right? So it's the same idea, he had, he was working, he had this position, just like how today we have these different, positions. Jake, they were, not all of them, I guess, lived off the land. Some of them had high positions, like when you go into the time of Nehemiah during the Achaemenid Empire, he had a position serving as the cupbearer. So you had a lot of our people basically in certain, I don't want to say top CEO positions, but Jake normally would rise up the ranks, right? So you had them, okay, you would have had Jakes at Israelites that worked as like regular farmers and fishermen, but you also had a lot of them that worked very close proximity to the king, right? Like, for example, like I said, Nehemiah, Daniel. When you think about Joseph in the time of Egypt, right? So you had a lot of people that had high positions of authority depending on the captivity that they're in, right? But the point is that they still were in a captivity. But Tobit's example here, that he performed, he remembered the Lord, with all his heart, right? With all his mind, you know what I'm saying? During this time, and it's only a very small, what's the word I'm looking for? A very small amount of our people that actually are truly seeking the Lord while he may be found and remembering themselves and actually, trying to have that relationship, because a lot of our people, they're going to get cut off and die, right? So, as a matter of fact, I'll end off with this last one in Baruch, because this is the, let me get this in Baruch 4. and 6, and it says, "And you were sold to the nations not for your destruction, but because you moved the Most High to wrath, and ye were delivered unto the enemies, for ye provoked him, and made you by sacrificing unto devils and not to the Most High," right? So this is one of the reasons we're in this captivity, because we provoked we provoked the Lord to anger, right? So and we were punished. The scriptures say, "The Assyrian, the rod of mine anger," right? So Esau today is that whipping stick that's basically punishing our people. So this is why we're in the condition that we're in, right? But Lord's will, the Lord has mercy upon us. The Lord remembers our sacrifice, and the Lord delivers us out of this, man, because we need a savior, right? So that's pretty much the point. But Lord's will, this lesson was quick and edifying. Just like to give all praises, glory, and honor to Yahweh Bashim Yahushai, Bashim Rakakwadash, double honors to the apostles and the elders, great millstone, for teaching us his truth. Until next time, I say Shalom.